HFK. We were recently invited to speak at BILT ANZ conference about the use of ArchiCAD in our MEDECA 118 project. BILT is a conference about computer technologies for architecture and construction. There's BILT North America, BILT Europe, BILT Asia, BILT Australia and New Zealand. It's an annual event. In Melbourne, BILT ANZ was last time held in 2019 at Crown, and back then Edgar, myself, Gerald and Dylan were taking turns to attend sessions using one ticket, all four of us pretending we were the same person, because Gerald was only able to talk Mark into buying one ticket for the whole office. And I'm completely with Mark on that one, because it's like $2,500 for 3 days or something. And it was the same this time, but this time for me it was of course free because I was a speaker. So this conference is officially for architects, engineers, builders, developers, project managers, property owners. I doubt there were too many property owners or developers there, but project managers, yes, definitely, because you all know that BIM is becoming more and more important, and BIM execution plan is now quite often part of the contract. So it was good for us to be represented, and the reason we got invited to speak was that Central Innovation, the company that sells ArchiCAD in Australia and New Zealand, they were one of the main platinum sponsors of the event, and they contacted Edgar as our BIM manager and asked if we could do a 1 hour and 15 minutes live presentation about the use of ArchiCAD in MEDECA 118 for this conference. And Edgar called me and said that if I can go, it will be good for our practice and it will be good for ArchiCAD, and it's in Gold Coast and all expenses will be paid by Central Innovation. So I didn't want Edgar to think I was easy, so I played hard to get for about a minute, said I needed to check with my wife, and only after a minute I called him back to say that I packed my bag. The conference was held at this RACV Royal Pines Resort, a golf resort inland from Surfers Paradise, a bit isolated but with great conference facilities. Central Innovation treated me really well. Flights by Qantas accommodated me on level 19, which is a top executive floor with access to executive lounge where everything is free. We all lived in the same hotel, constantly in lifts with one another, and I soon realized that I was the only person out of a few hundreds who lived on level 19. There was one other invited keynote speaker from US who lived on level 18, also executive, everyone else lower. This made me feel really nervous, because I got obviously mistaken for someone important. What these guys expect from me in return, especially considering that most speakers there were real professionals traveling from conference to conference each year, and you can easily tell they greet the audience by saying, "I'm so happy to be here, really excited, absolutely pumped." And I was a first-time speaker without any experience. Of course, these events are not only about actual sessions, but also about networking. You meet so many interesting people, and it's a really small world. I was talking to this girl, Alexandra, who moved to Perth from London, and then it turns out that in London she was a BIM manager in our office. She still cherished memories of Carl visiting London some years ago, as if she met Jesus or something. Then I met this guy, Moyes, BIM manager from Sydney office of DKO. DKO also work in ArchiCAD. They use more than 100 licenses. You all know their Leaning Tower of Docklands, Marina Tower. We instantly became lifelong friends with Moyes because we had a mutual enemy. We're spending our time discussing what a ridiculous software that Revit is. At least he knew something about Revit. I was bad-mouthing it for no reason. Dorian Smart from Melbourne office of Cox, so many truly bright, interesting people. This is people waiting for invitation to my session called MEDECA 118, World's Second Tallest Tower Designed in ArchiCAD. I'm checking equipment 15 minutes before the start. I felt reasonably relaxed. I knew I had a good presentation, based the project introduction, half of it on presentation previously prepared for Carl's International Talks in 2021, just added more backstage material. Second half more technical, as this was a BIM conference, but for ArchiCAD users I think pretty interesting too. But still, at the back of my mind there was this fear, what if when I see a room full of strangers I start talking in some nervous falsetto or something. But it was good. I I was introduced to the audience by the head of DBEI, organization that runs these BILT conferences. Atmosphere was great and it all went really well. So this was my first slide. I quickly introduced myself and our practice, said that we are currently in a process of gradually becoming bilingual, using Craig's language metaphor, embracing Revit as well, but our first language is ArchiCAD, so I asked ArchiCAD users in the audience to raise hands, and about half of people did, which probably was not a true representation of ArchiCAD versus Revit users proportion in the country, because by definition ArchiCAD users were more interested in my talk. But it was what I expected, and I said that if you use ArchiCAD 24, you see a fragment of this image on your computer while it's loading, because this is a feature project of ArchiCAD 24. And when Graphisoft released it in 2020, the world was in full lockdown, so world premiere was held online, and I was closing that event with a 10-minute speech, which I was going to show them later in the presentation, and then give a further update on things discussed in it. So that part would only be interesting for ArchiCAD users, but first for everyone else I was going to give a sort of a backstage tour of the project, options we looked at, ideas we had, pretty much randomly picked just to give an overall feel. And in this video you're watching right now, I will show this first half of my BILT ANZ presentation, and a second technical part I will record as a separate video. So let's get into it. I expect most of you already suspected where Melbourne is, but just in case it's there. And it's a 7, sometimes 8 hours flight to KL. My presentation was in PowerPoint and there's a transition effect there, unfortunately couldn't find it here, making this look like a tropical thunderstorm lightning, drawing a map of central KL for us to see a location of our site in relation to famous local landmarks like Petronas Towers. This is what KL looked like in 2010 when we started, our site in red. A bit of a funnily shaped site. Pay attention to those two stadiums to the right from it. This photo was taken in 1962 when Stadium Nigara, the one closer to us, was just finished. But even more important to our story is Stadium Merdeka a bit further. You notice it has the same name as our tower. You see that in 2010 the area was a little bit neglected for such a significant place in Malaysia, because Stadium Merdeka is where in 1957 Malaysian independence was proclaimed. The first Prime Minister, Tunku Abdul Rahman, raised his hand to declare the birth of the nation, and our tower is meant to celebrate and symbolize this moment in history of the country. And that's why, same as the stadium, it is called Merdeka, which means independence. Some early schemes done before us for the site, traditional Islamic campus style, but that's not what client wanted. Client wanted a bold statement about modern nation going into the future, and our client is one of Malaysia's most important companies, PNB, Permodalan Nasional Berhad. So when Carl looked at the site thinking where to put the tower, he first drew this triangle connecting two heritage-listed stadiums with the location of future tower in his mind, and that allowed him to draw this axis towards the monorail station at south, which would become a linear park, providing access to both Stadium Merdeka and the tower. And that's the logic behind the master plan. We now have a purposely built MRT station, underground subway station, also called Merdeka at Nos under Jalan Hajabat, and already mentioned existing Jalan Maharaja Lila monorail station at south, connected to the tower by linear park. Linear Park was designed by landscape architects Sasaki out of Boston. Just left of the central water feature you see a beautiful young man carrying a child. I was photoshopping people into this image and thought it needed a happy father, so I photoshopped myself and my son David. Our first look at the tower in this presentation from south, main pedestrian approach. For the first meeting of Carl with Malaysian Prime Minister, we were asked to prepare 6 alternative schemes, 6 tower shapes, so Carl presented these 6 gold models and managed to gently persuade Prime Minister to select the one on your right, because that's the one Carl wanted to do, and you know he can be very persuasive. We were finding our inspiration in Malaysian culture, Songgit patterns of traditional Malaysian batik, these diamonds or triangles. You can see them in our facade, and that pretty much gave us our geometry. This is where architecture meets structural engineering, because in our tower structure behind the enclosure follows the same pathways highlighted in the facade. And we were extremely lucky to have as our structural engineer legendary Leslie Robertson, right photo, perhaps most famous for being the structural engineer of New York's World Trade Center Twin Towers, tragically destroyed on September 11. Absolute legend. Les passed away 2 years ago at the age of 93. It was a great privilege for us. Apart from Leslie Robertson, Robert Bird Group was involved, and the structural engineers of record are Arab. Classic structure for a megatall, not like I was involved in too many megatalls, it's just that during COVID lockdowns, Carol Willis, director of Skyscraper Museum in Manhattan, organized and hosted a series of fascinating online talks about supertalls by world's leading architects and structural engineers from SOM, KPF. Carl did his talk on Medeka 118, and here I'm reusing some of the slides prepared for that presentation. So if we start from tower base, we have a circular cofferdam wall, 137 60-meter deep piles, each 2.2 meters in diameter, then 4-meter deep slab on top, diamond-shaped lift core. Let's move further up the building. 8 mega columns, each one at the base larger than any bedroom in my house. 6 belt trusses, 3 main ones and 3 intermediate. Main belt trusses are tied back to the core by outriggers, absolutely huge things. There's Carl standing next to the top of one of the outriggers where it connects to a mega column. Belt truss zones are 3 levels tall, and if those were just standard office levels, diagonal structure would be a nuisance, blocking windows, so we turned belt truss levels into transition zones. 2 lower levels become a double height sky lobby, where you change from shuttle lifts to local lifts. And our shuttle lifts are double-deckers, that's why you see a bit of a mezzanine in section on your right. And the next level up becomes plant. There's your 3 belt truss levels. Bottom of this slide shows a typical office floor plan with a healthy 12-meter lease span. Top of this slide shows a typical hotel floor plan. To follow tower geometry, floor plates gradually grow and shrink. This is a minimum floor plate. Section in 3D highlighting where that happens, and this is a maximum floor plate. Section in 3D highlighting where that happens. 82 levels of office. On top of that, 16 levels of 5-star Park Hyatt hotel. The reception in a second sky lobby on level 75, so you take express lift from ground lobby straight to level 75 reception, and there change the lift to your hotel floor. Hotel interiors were done by London-based GA Design Studio, invited by Hyatt. You can see their design traditional, Asian, lots of timber. Notice those timber shutters, top left of this image, because they presented an interesting challenge for us. The thing is that level 75 reception is double height around the outer perimeter facing facade, so it cuts off level 76 from access to facade, turning it into an enclosed internal space for office workers from upper levels to change lifts from express to local. But we wanted at least some borrowed natural light on level 76, so we have internal windows there, and that's where those timber shutters are attached to conceal windows from hotel guests below. But people on level 76 are going to see these shutters, and timber was quite foreign to design language of level 76. That's why Carl decided to gently introduce more timber into level 76 interiors to balance it. And this is his detail of a feature mullion there. Every second mullion gets framed in timber, which continues onto ceilings and sill. More timber goes into sit-in. We are in a side wing of the tower, the only place where level 76 gets access to actual facade. This is a mid part of an outrigger. On a level below it will connect to the core on your right, and on a level above to a mega column on your left. One of solutions to mind your head issue under the slope, that planter and a bench. Anyway, just a fragment of level 76 interior design study. I told you I was going to show random bits and pieces. On top of hotel levels, we have 2 levels of restaurant and then a large public observation deck. 2 dedicated lifts at Tower North, highlighted in plan and section here, will take people from ground straight up to level 115. The external wall of the lift shaft is glass, so you will fly up into KL sky over the city in front of you, disappearing below, because northern views are city views with Petronas. This will be a spectacular ride. Once on level 115, you'll take escalator up to the main sky deck level 116, where we have 2 open terraces. And the next level up is thrills. I'm not sure how much of it is officially public knowledge yet, so let's just leave it at that. A quick section showing how top levels work. Now let's move down to tower base. There's a 10 meters difference in height between lower ground level at north on your right and upper ground level at south on your left. We have 2 main foyers at north and south and 2 side galleries around the tower connecting those foyers. Works like this. Zigzaggy roof over the gallery is half glass, and there's a roof garden on top. I'll show you more slides, but first let's have a quick look at foyers. Tower drop-off is on your right from Jalan Hajibat, going to look like this. Office entrance on your left, hotel on your right. So what's inside, behind the facade? Carl told this story in a couple of his international talks. Designing foyers, he was inspired by Malaysian nature. You know, he loves it and spends half of his holidays in Langkawi. He also traveled through Borneo and was taken by these Gomonton caves. Stone walls, sunlight from above, water dripping down those walls. And that's exactly how he designed our foyers. Stone walls, sunlight from above, water dripping down, the water feature by fluidity out of LA. 2 observation lifts take off and land behind this wall of water. If from the same spot you look left, you'll see stairs and escalators taking you to upper ground level. That balcony will accommodate a little cafe, separate stair taking you there. This is a good example of how, for these compact and geometrically complex spaces, 3D cutaway sections really help to explain your design. You still need to produce all relevant drawings, but I'm talking about presenting your design. One image tells the full story. On the opposite hotel side of North Foyer, separated by water feature, over a stair up to hotel lobby, you see a soffit of a viewing platform. Carl calls it Widow's Walk, from upper ground level overlooking the lower ground foyer. If we turn around, here's our typical entrance portal. We have 4 of these, 2 on each side. In this exercise, we were locating various devices like card readers, CCTV cameras, because no matter how big your project is, you still need to pay the same attention to details. Each tile joint is important. Just some stills from a very early animation illustrating the journey from lower ground to upper ground, up the stair, through side gallery, looking up through the roof, seeing tower above and a roof garden, and we are in South Foyer. That structure at center is a welcome desk. We call it Minangkabau because the highlighted roof was shaped after traditional hat of Minangkabau people in Malaysia. Arrows point at our south atrium, open all the way up to first sky lobby, and on top of it we have a bit of a glass floor on level 40 from where you can look 36 levels down. If you walk around Minangkabau, you'll find yourself in front of the office entrance. Here we were thinking about locating security equipment, all these walk-through metal detectors, baggage scanners. Unfortunately, they will be installed permanently, not the most beautiful pieces architecturally, but that's life, so we needed to make sure it will all work with queuing at peak hours, etc. The interesting thing is that thermal cameras for COVID screening are now a standard part of security equipment, and ours will be mounted on mega columns on each side. More security equipment turnstiles. We received specs from all flip barrier manufacturers competing for this job and modeled each option in every detail to compare. Of course, it's not only about the looks, it's also about performance, about the speed, response time from maintenance team, but looks are important as well. And this option from Boon Adam was everyone's favorite, although I quite like the one with travertine housing as well. Moving further in, another good example of how 3D cutaway sections come in handy to describe crowded complex spaces, or this cut through side gallery. Anyway, so far we've been looking at the tower itself, but we will also have 2 podiums on each side and in future 3 residential towers that will grow out of those podiums. The larger podium at east is a retail mall, well under construction now. I'm personally spending my days reviewing shop drawings submitted for construction, revise and resubmit, revise and resubmit. Smaller podium at west will accommodate ballroom for Park Hyatt, auditorium, gallery, wellness center. We're just about to move into DD with gym, so it's pretty much work in progress still. I'll show you a couple of examples. Red arrows represent public entry points, showing how transparent and accessible to general public the development is. Yellow dotted line shows the extent of shell above, to make sure people will be able to walk around the building without getting wet, which is important in KL. So, larger podium on your left is a retail mall. Let's have a closer look, with the help of my magical 3D cutaway section. I'm not gonna bore you with statistics. The main feature of the mall is a self-supporting 88 meters in diameter glass dome. This diagram illustrates that strategically placed escalator voids below will ensure sunlight penetrates all the way down, and we will see tower through the dome. But how do we clean dome glass from below and change lights? An obvious solution is to use those telescopic arms spider legs units, but you need to store it somewhere and a pretty big lift to take it to the top level. Technically speaking, this should have been Baken's problem, because for the mall we designed building envelope and they designed interiors. But Baken's, they are great artists, you know, inspired by nature, fallen leaves and all that, so we were the ones to make sure it all actually works. And Gerard suggested a very interesting solution, this maintenance gantry. One end would be attached to dome center as a pivot point, and the other would slowly travel around the perimeter, making only 2 full circles a day, as if the dome was a clock face and this gantry an hour hand, if you look from below. And it could actually show time. This would have a symbolic meaning, as there used to be a sundial, much loved by locals, that had to be relocated to give way to construction. So we would be kind of giving the sundial back to community in its new reincarnation. And we've done lots of studies how maintenance stair would sit inside the truss, designed different options for the cladding, like this, or even this. And those mystic symbols on a dome ring below, that's 9 and 12 time. So we even designed a new font. And after all this, the option did not go ahead, but it was still a great fun. Now, there's been many physical models made for this project, in all possible scales and levels of detail. What's different about this one is that this is of course fake, computer generated, just for fun, but the reason I'm showing it to you is that it very clearly shows our north touchdown point, where shell comes to a point to touch the ground. And it is actually not just there for looks, it's absolutely functional, concealing one of ventilation shafts from the underground MRT station. A good example of how, out of these technical difficulties, interesting designs are often born. One other thing this image shows is a frit on canopy glass. We, and I mean Shem, designed this frit pattern out of little typical tower floor plates, see on your left. And in this exercise we were looking at different scales for it to make sure it casts nice soft shadows below for a subtle Islamic feel. There are 2 ventilation shafts out of the MRT station below, one behind the touchdown and the other one concealed by that little balcony on your left, which is not really that little. It will accommodate management office, provide access to one of future resi towers. There's a lift inside. The tricky bit here was that structurally we were not allowed to transfer any load on top of the station below, so all that had to be cantilevered, and different design options for this balcony were all to do with different ways to support it. We were deciding between 4 options: option 1, option 2, option 3, option 4, same options from all possible angles, option 1, option 2, option 3, option 4, same options in elevation section and lower and upper floor plans, option 1, option 2. I'm just showing off how methodical we are in documenting our design process. We're now looking at the mall from the opposite, south side. I talked about this glass bridge at our last leadership conference. For those who were not there, the main access from tower into the mall is at ground level below. This bridge is only for visitors of tower observation deck. On their way down, they will be forced to walk through this bridge into the mall and leave all their money there because there will simply be no other way out for them. And this is a little construction update on your right. Dream becoming reality. You are now looking at the bridge from above. And another construction update. Glass dome being assembled. Closer to the bottom you can see two ventilation shafts and how they're getting enclosed into the building envelope. Let's talk about roof gardens. We have them on both sides of the tower. Here's a roof garden between tower and the mall. You can again see the glass bridge at the distance. 3D cutaway section at the bottom of the slide shows a typical cut through the garden. The guy with a chainsaw, he's not a maniac, he's a gardener on his way to look after the garden. But there's a 2-meter wide and 1-meter deep gutter between them to collect all the water from podium slopes facing the tower. Because when it rains in KL, it really rains. So that gutter had to be walkable, and in this exercise we were designing steel mesh panels on top, some of them hinged for maintenance access. This is a roof garden on the opposite, west side. As I said, west podium is still work in progress. This image shows one of the options we looked at for west podium's central part facing the tower, an open roof terrace. It would have a bar and be accessible by main tower employees and west tower residents as well. It would have great views, complemented by roof garden below. Yet another 3D cutaway section illustrates how typhoon shutter skyfold wall would be concealed in a ceiling, and terrace would be supported by large trusses because it is partly over a column-free ballroom below. Terrace would have rather interesting tower views directly from below. So that was one option for this area, and another alternative option was not to have an open roof terrace, but instead this presentation should have been called a power of 3D cutaway sections. Instead, to glaze two central facets of the enclosure and create a large double-story gym behind, because we need to have a wellness center with squash courts, badminton, sauna and a large gym. This would be a truly spectacular gym, but neither of the options are going ahead, so next time I'll show you what it is. And the last thing I showed in this presentation was an old feasibility study from 2014 that we did for one of the adjacent sites. It was a rather technical study to do with some underground works and infrastructure to see if it was potentially structurally possible to build a tall tower on that site in future. So we didn't have to actually design the tower, but Jared asked me to sketch something exciting, using his words to whet their appetite. And I got all excited myself and stayed all night in the office, our old office, didn't go home, didn't sleep. And by the morning, a sheet of paper with these 3 images waited for Jared on his desk. It was 2014, Zaha was still with us. Those pedestrian bridges at Tower Base, one connecting it to monorail station and the other going over the monorail to Linear Park, gave direction to the whole geometry. So in the morning, people started coming in. Jared came. For those who know Jared, he's not easily impressed, but this time he was visually pleased. He grabbed the paper, took it to the window, and was standing there for at least 5 minutes looking at it, smiling and nodding his head. I prepared myself to finally hear from him that I'm the greatest building designer he ever met. And he eventually looked at me and said, so that's what modern computers can do. Oh well. The reason I included it in the presentation was to talk about a Rhino connection and to make a point that this was almost the only time in the whole project when we designed and modeled something not directly in ArchiCAD. Remember, I was sponsored by Central Innovation, so I was selling ArchiCAD like there was no tomorrow. Back in 2014, communication with Rhino was rather basic, but now it's just a walk in the park, and my beautiful watercolors here, as fake as that physical model. Then I showed photos of some key moments in construction history from 2015 till now, and said a few words about project team, given a special mention to RSP, local architects who documented our tower design without any distortions, great professionals, pleasure to work with. Another local architectural practice, GDP, documented our retail mall design, also a big thank you. We were blessed with an amazing project team. And this wraps up my report to FK staff about the first half of our presentation at the BILT ANZ conference. Of course, it only included less than 1% of interesting materials we could show, little chapters in our design journey in this project. Over the years, I've done a few little talks in the office. In October 2018, at our Melbourne staff meeting, after Hussein and Munya showed their animation for West Podium. Then next year, at one of our Design Dialogue Wednesdays, we discussed locating various devices, like beam smoke detectors, in tower foyers. We are actually now revisiting that with Gerard, having a closer look at some cases where those devices cannot be concealed in slots and niches, finding elegant solutions. When the tower topped out at the last staff meeting of 2021, I showed a few studies happening at the time, like these master readers used in case of evacuation, Niagara Place balconies, 3D anamorphic distortion screen study for Linear Park, P&B Museum on level 4. And there is so much more left behind the scenes. Our design journey in this project deserves a big book, but we are still writing it. And talking about books, if you haven't heard yet, CTBUH recently released 118 Tallest Buildings book. I was assisting Carl in collecting materials for it. 118 instead of the usual 100, obviously in recognition of our tower, and it is sold for $118. I will now record a second half of this report back to staff about the conference, covering ArchiCAD and BIM related part of our presentation there, and also questions and feedback I received. And thanks for watching this first half.